The legal claim is you should be able to kill two people hanging off the edge of a boat so you can blow up cocaine? He's claiming that the president has the authority to protect our people on the high seas. They concluded the drugs were not heading to the United States. I mean, this is nuts.
Later on, a couple hours later, I was told, hey, there had to be a reattack because there were a couple folks that could still be in the fight. Access to radios, there was a link-up point of another potential boat. Drugs were still there. They were actively interacting with them. Had to take that read. I said, Roger.
That is Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth explaining the second strike on that drug boat. And we've now learned that there were probably a third and fourth strikes as well. We've actually learned quite a bit more since last week about what happened. And it is relevant in terms of assessing the legal questions. NBC News reporting on exactly what Admiral Frank Bradley told lawmakers about what he knew at the time he made the call. Now, I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. Admiral Bradley has a very good reputation. So I take what he says seriously. Unlike Pete Hegseth, who really is, wildly unqualified for the job he's in, Admiral Bradley is a pro. This is a guy who's been doing this a long time and is quite well respected. So what he told Congress matters. But I have to tell you, I don't know how what he told Congress really helps the legal case that they've been making. So here's what we know. They're citing two people, two U.S. officials, and one person familiar with the congressional briefing. So three different people. And then I'm going to also talk about something that CNN reported on this. So NBC reporting the commander who oversaw the strikes told lawmakers that U.S. intelligence officials had confirmed the identities of the 11 people on the boat and validated them as legitimate targets. Then the military launched airstrikes as part of President Trump's military campaign against alleged drug smuggling vessels. Now, obviously, if there were 11 specific people, that enhances their argument. But here's the problem. Unlike other attacks that have happened in the past, for example, on people who are viewed as terrorists sympathetic to al-Qaeda or members of al-Qaeda, the congressional authorization that occurred for that does not exist here. There is no congressional authorization to simply target individuals here. And the argument that this was a armed conflict is also a tough one to make legally, because typically it has to be organized. And these are drug cartels, different ones not working together. An administration official said Bradley made clear in his briefings with lawmakers that he acted in complete compliance with the law throughout the operation. Quote, as with all such actions, a uniformed JAG provided advice and counsel every step of the way, the official said. Bradley told lawmakers that the orders he received from Hegseth were to kill the individuals on the approved target list, which included everyone on the boat, then destroy the drugs and sink the boat. Bradley told lawmakers the second strike killed the two survivors but did not sink the boat, so he ordered a third and fourth strike to complete the mission, the officials and person familiar with the congressional briefings said. Bradley, referencing the approved list of targets, said Hegseth told him to kill everyone on board and to destroy the vessel. Now, I don't know how he could possibly justify that legally, but let's read on and then we'll get there. In another briefing, Bradley was asked whether Hegseth gave him what's called a no-quarter order, which is an illegal military directive to kill all enemy combatants and show no mercy, even if they surrender or are gravely injured. They said Bradley replied that he was not given such an order and would not have followed one if it had been given. So here's the problem. They are recognizing that you're not allowed to do what happened here. Unlike a no-quarter order, an order to kill everyone on a target list is not forbidden, right? So the problem here, though, is the shipwrecked aspect of it. Putting aside whether they are justified legally in these strikes at all, which I don't think they are. But it's even harder to justify the second strike and the third and the fourth, particularly the second, because there is specific international law that refers to not targeting the wounded, the sick, and the shipwrecked. It says shipwrecked. How else is this defined other than shipwrecked? Another part of the boat split off and caught fire, but a major section of the boat was not ablaze. The damage made the boat unlikely to continue navigating. That's called shipwrecked. The damage made the boat unlikely to continue navigating. That's shipwrecked. He told lawmakers there were bags of cocaine on the boat that were not ejected during the initial explosion. Because the bags of cocaine were not seen floating in the water, Bradley said he believed they were strapped in and then stayed tied down during the explosion, making it likely the drugs were still under the capsized boat. The cocaine was wrapped in plastic waterproof bundles, which likely made them more buoyant and may have contributed to the boat not sinking, he told lawmakers. I'm reading from an NBC News article called Admiral Told Lawmakers Everyone on Alleged Drug Boat Was on a List of Military Targets. Now, we keep being told that this was urgent, right? There has to be some level of immediacy here, right? There has to be a need to do it right then and not send in the Coast Guard, not go in, right? What is the urgency? You got two guys hanging off a broken boat and some cocaine that's still there? Is the claim, because there was apparently some other boat that they thought might be trying to rendezvous with this boat, is the claim that the other boat was going to come get the drugs, so therefore you can kill everyone who was on board? Or you can blow up all the drugs? Bradley observed them take off their shirts to check each other for wounds and told lawmakers they did not appear to have any visible injuries. He said the military's overhead surveillance zoomed in to ensure the survivors weren't injured or bleeding. So it sounds like what he's saying is if they'd been injured, we wouldn't have killed them. But because they were hanging off a piece of a boat without significant injuries, we did. He said he determined that the boat sustained damage significant enough that it may not be able to navigate. It may still have been able to keep floating or drifting. That is the definition of a shipwrecked boat. Bradley explained the three sources said that his decision to target the boat with the survivors was because the drugs were not destroyed and the individuals on the boat had not surrendered and were not visibly injured, but were still on the list of approved targets. And while the survivors were not armed, he said the mission identified the drugs as the threat to the U.S., effectively deeming the cocaine as the weapon that could endanger Americans. I mean, this is nuts. The legal claim is you should be able to kill two people hanging off the edge of a boat so you can blow up cocaine? But here's the biggest point, is we keep being told that the urgency of this is these were drugs that were coming to the United States. That's what the president said. These were drugs that were coming to the United States to kill Americans, right? That's the whole justification. Well, now, Bradley told lawmakers that the boat was traveling south towards another country in South America, Suriname. Bradley told the lawmakers the drugs were eventually heading to Europe or Africa. So what's the threat to the United States? They concluded the drugs were not heading to the United States. And now I'm reading from a CNN report called Exclusive Boat at Center of Double Tap Strike Controversy Was Meeting Vessel Heading to Suriname, Admiral told lawmakers. Bradley argued there was still a possibility the drug shipment could have ultimately made its way from Suriname to the U.S. It could have maybe. That's the standard? Trump said the strike occurred while the terrorists were at sea in international waters transporting illegal narcotics heading to the United States. That's not true. All right, so before the break, I gave a little bit of a misleading tease. I said basically what happened was a caller on Thursday, a guy named Dan from South Carolina, who's listened to the show for 9 years, was denouncing me for having on Judge Napolitano from Newsmax because he agreed that there's no legal justification. He said, why don't you have on someone who disagrees? And I said, I don't know that there's almost any former JAG who has justified this. Almost anyone. Well, there is one. There was a guy on Fox News, a former Navy JAG officer named Don Brown. And that's who the caller was referring to. So we reached out to Don Brown, and I invited him to come on the show, as I promised I would. He did not respond to us. I'm not surprised, but he didn't respond. So, in the spirit of doing what I said I was going to do, let's play a little bit of the sound. Here's the first question and answer from former Navy JAG officer Don Brown on Fox News. This is number one.
You're a JAG officer. You are of the type that are being invoked today. A lot of JAG officers appearing on CNN or MSNBC talking about violations of the Geneva Convention in this second boat strike. What say you?
Well, good to be back with you, Will. I say that's ridiculous. Listen, the legality of protecting American citizens on the high seas is vetted in international law and goes back to the beginning of the Republic when Thomas Jefferson sent the Marines and the Navy in the Mediterranean against the Barbary pirates. Lincoln seized the RMS Trent, and even FDR ordered the Navy to shoot and sink German U-boats almost a year before Pearl Harbor. We can protect our people on the high seas, and it goes into custom. The statutes that you cited are important, but the inherent right of the commander-in-chief under Article 2 of the Constitution gives President Trump the right to do this. But the difference is this, Will, we lost more Americans in 1 year to fentanyl than 10 years to the Vietnam War. And, all of us know of folks who have lost their kids. These are weapons of mass destruction. The consequences are high. And if that boat was still in the water, we had every right to take it out because it was carrying, by all accounts, weapons of mass destruction. I applaud Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, and President Trump in taking action here to protect Americans.
So the end part of his answer has nothing to do with the law, right? The fact that drugs are bad, fentanyl is bad, even though it seems it was cocaine and not fentanyl on the ship. But regardless, drugs are bad. Let's all agree on that. He's claiming that the president has the authority to protect our people on the high seas. This is a boat that wasn't coming to the United States and doesn't address the question of the legal issues of international law clearly saying you can't go after people on a shipwrecked boat. It's not hard. This isn't CNN, MSNBC stuff. This is just right or wrong legally. I'm not talking about the policy choices. Here's a little bit more from former JAG officer Don Brown on Fox News, number 2.
It seems that there's two buckets for this conversation. One, the legal framework, which we've just laid out, and you added the Article 2 powers of the president to conduct these strikes. The second bucket, though, is the one that is currently at the forefront of the conversation everywhere else, and that is the second strike on this one drug boat where there were reported survivors. Now, you heard the Secretary of War. It's the fog of war, something that journalists are and by the way, I think he would probably say something similar about JAG officers, are very unfamiliar with. It's the second guessing. It's the looking over the shoulder of guys that make critical decisions in the moment. And it's very easy for a journalist sitting in a studio in New York City to say, what one should or shouldn't have done. But what do you say about this conversation of the second strike on that boat?
Right. Sure. First of all, it should not be the role of JAG officers to second guess the commander-in-chief, but to reinforce good order and discipline in the military. Here's what I say. Those boats have weapons of mass destruction that will take out Americans. If the boat is still in the water with those drugs on it, whether some terrorist is hanging on or not, you blow it the hell out of the water because it's going to kill Americans. That's exactly what I say, Will.
It shouldn't be the role of JAG officers. They should just support the president, whatever he does. It's the whole point of having a JAG officer there, is to help assess, is this legal? And this whole fog of war nonsense. Fog of war relates to questions about members of the military make, where they had to make a split-second decision. And, there's uncertainty. And you can't hold them accountable for every single decision they make. Totally get it. When there's a lot of factors that you can't understand unless you're on the ground. Here, there was a decision made apparently ahead of time to kill everybody. And apparently, the Admiral was saying there was no fog, right? That actually, it was very clear that they could even zoom in and see that the people weren't injured, and so therefore they were fair game. I mean, this is bananas. There is no legal justification. There are no legitimate former JAG folks who will tell you it was. That's not policy. That's legal.